Welcome to the Monday, February 9th, Education Committee and Supplementary regular meeting of the board. I will now turn the meeting over to Dr. Marseille.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Van Lynch. What we're going to do this evening is we have a presentation, and I see that our entire curriculum student services team is joining us today. Part of the conversation in this presentation is a continuing dialogue from Curriculum Committee of the Board that will attempt to speak to the shifts that have occurred in the Commonwealth around the PSSAs and the ELA and math core standards, and how we have attempted to take those particular mandates and how that translates into our instructional practice. So I know that we have several slides that we're going to produce. So I'll stop talking and I'll have Ms. Hockfield, or whoever is the first person up. Dr. Doria? Okay.
Figure this guy out. Go. All right. So as Dr. Marseille just said, our presentation this evening is one where we're going to just kind of describe to you kind of how the district has adopted the PA core shifts in English language arts and math. It's important for everyone to note that while there have been shifts, there has not been a complete abandonment of the work that we've done forever, the good work we've done forever with our curriculum. We've tried throughout to balance the standards that we've always known in this district with the new mandates. And we believe that we've done kind of the best of both worlds. So that's what we're going to be presenting to you tonight. I'm really excited, and this has been an interesting process because we've spent the last month or so with the whole elementary and secondary, so K through 12 team, talking about this. And I think that's a really wonderful approach to this kind of a dialogue. So we're not doing it in isolation. It's a K through 12 dialogue about the shifts in the PA core and the testing that's mandated by the state. And what you'll notice in our presentation is that we've divided it into two parts. The first part, we're going to talk about the shifts in the core. The second part, we're going to be talking about the mandated state testing. I'm excited that our whole curriculum team, K through 12, is with us tonight. And we're going to have a chance to hear from them. In March of last year, we presented, the curriculum team presented to the CCOB and also to the Educational Board the beginning of our work in alignment from our standards, which we refer to as legacy standards, to the PA core standards. We've continued that work since then, and that's going to be the work that we're going to be presenting tonight. Part of the core, the PA core, speaks to college and career readiness, and that's an interesting term when you come to a district like Lower Merion. We've always prepared students for college and career readiness. The difference in the core shifts is it speaks to all students. And I think it's really great for us to always be mindful of that. We are talking about all students. While the core shifts are not new in many senses, we've always had dialogue around complexity. We've always had dialogue around critical thinking and analytical thinking and supporting one's beliefs from text. So it's not new, it's just making us more conscious of these things that are articulated in the core. Also important is that we balance all of our work with our work on the strategic plan, and we've really used that as our guide to everything. So when we talk about the core shifts, we're always mindful of, in light of doing what's best for students, in light of the holistic needs for students, in light of having a curriculum that is student-driven and promotes student success, that incorporates technology, that incorporates global connectedness, and world language, and all of those other things in service that we pride ourselves on in this district. So when we have this discussion tonight, we just want to be mindful that it's in light of the work that we've done with our strategic plan and the history of instruction and curriculum in this district.
Marcy. Just to recap, in 2013, the elementary and secondary team shared with the board the expectations for the shifts and some actions that were in place to say this is what we're doing moving forward. We want to spend a little bit of time this evening having the team share with you specifically the actions that we've taken with curriculum, with teaching and learning practice, and with our level of assessment at the district level, and then how that matches the state assessments as well. The district said in 2013 that we were going to align our curriculum and our district level assessments to the shifts, and that we were going to have professional learning opportunities to address both the curriculum and the teaching and learning practices. We focused on instructional time to make sure that there was time for writing, intentional time for writing, at the elementary, middle, and secondary level. And that we were looking to integrate technology and embrace a culture of change. With the culture of change, we're going to share that a little bit in our work, but we want to focus on looking at every teacher as a teacher of reading and writing across the board. Easier to do at the elementary level, and sometimes at the secondary level we have some questions about that. We're going to explain how we look at text through the lens of being a mathematician and a scientist, through reading of that, and how they use language in their writing. That will be a little bit different. So that's that balanced curriculum lens. And we were looking at embracing math beyond computation. So we're going to have some examples of those multi-layer thinking, the process of going through, and some of those changes along the way. And now we have our team.
Good evening. Dr. DeRosa and I are going to talk to you tonight about the shifts in English language arts. And as you see on this slide, it names 6 shifts. And I'll talk through these, I think, with more meaning in talking about what it looks like in the classroom and in our curriculum. But essentially, the shift in PA core means a balance of literacy, literature, and informational texts. It means building knowledge in the discipline areas, and that's literacy knowledge in the discipline areas. A staircase of complexity means that we help our students climb each step and support them along the way to challenge them to read to their best ability. Text-based answers, I'll explain that with an example, but essentially when students are trying to support an idea, it must come from text. They write from a number of sources now, and we're very cognizant of what we call academic vocabulary. What does that look like for our student outcomes? Well, essentially, our students need to read more, and they need to read from a variety of texts and text modes. In the past, it was largely, at least in English language arts class, from literature, from poetry, and from short stories and novels and plays. But now they need to read from all kinds of informational texts as well. When they read, it's not just about comprehension. It's about going deeper into the text, to look at the structure and to look at the author's craft and the implications of what they comprehend. They always need to return to text for evidence, maybe one text, maybe 2 or 3, and make comparisons in their discussion and in their writing. And they need to write for a variety of purposes and audiences, authentic writing across the curriculum. And finally, understand and use academic vocabulary so that when students use a term like analysis or a thesis, it means the same across the curriculum. What that means for our curriculum writing is that, of course, in English language arts, we need to incorporate more nonfiction reading. We need more cross-content reading in other courses. In science, science teachers will help their students to understand science text rather than depending on English to have that happen. Again, close reading means looking at author's purpose and how the author created that meaning. Writing and speaking variety of purposes, citing evidence to connect reading and writing, and finally, grammar has come back. In our past standards, grammar really was not important, played no role. Now, in our new standards, it plays the role it probably should have for a long time.
Barbara discussed with you what the PA Core means to students, teachers, curriculum instruction, and our professional learning. In the next few slides, I will show you a comparison between the legacy standards, or our former English language standards, and the new PA Core standards. The first one is a shift from a focus on literature, as Barbara had said, instead of just doing drama, poetry, and fiction, to a balance of literacy and informational texts of the 21st century, such as scientific nonfiction, articles, blogs, directional manuals, and etc. There is a balance between reading and writing. In the legacy standards, it was stated that all teachers should be teachers of literacy. But now, what the PA Core standards did was they delineated very specific skills that need to be taught in science, social studies, and technology. In the legacy standards, comprehension was the goal. In the PA Core standards, of course, students still need to comprehend, but it requires a student to closely read the text, to analyze the meaning, the inferences and implications, and also the author's craft and structure. What were the words that the author used? What was the author's mood and tone? And how did the point of view influence how events are described? In the legacy standards, as Barbara had said, grammar was de-emphasized. We focused on the process of writing. Now, the process is assumed. The emphasis is on students writing for multiple purposes, multiple audience, with correctness. And finally, there is a shift from identifying meaning of words to truly understanding vocabulary, and an emphasis on figurative language.
I just want to mention that in all of these shifts, there's really nothing new for us here at Lower Merion. It's simply a difference in emphasis and depth and rigor. And that is important to know. We've been doing these things all along, but now we're just shifting along with the shifts. So what you have in front of you here are the reading and writing targets and recommendations for instruction, the evidence through grade level teams and professional learning communities. This is what has been happening in our schools as teachers are working in collaborative teams to look at writing instruction, grammar instruction, to look at how reading and writing connect with one another rather than looking at them separately, to look at the skills of close analytical reading, and to look at content area literacy across curriculum. We have developed our secondary writing program, which we've talked about recently, which links to elementary writing program, and we have created a K-12 grammar scope and sequence. All of this to help the teachers adjust to these shifts.
Some actions that we have taken are from grades 1 to 12, we have identified anchor papers not only to help teachers score each of the domains of writing, but also to use those anchor papers as mentor texts to show a student where they are and how they can improve their papers. And we have aligned the reading benchmarks to the new PA Core standards.
We are in our third year of administrator and teacher developed Keystone Literature Diagnostic Assessment, which helps to identify students who may have some problems as they look to take the Keystone Literature exam. It has given us fabulous data and has enabled us to provide support for those students who might need it. We are in the process of revising our classroom assessments in humanities, in both social studies and in English, requiring students to do more in-depth reading and analysis and to apply their knowledge rather than to just state their knowledge. And finally, next year we will have reading benchmarks in our middle school. On to mathematics.
Okay, good evening, everyone. The PA Core and Common Core math standards are built on 6 key shifts. The first shift is focus, moving away from the mile-wide, inch-deep curricula. Students spending more time thinking and working on fewer concepts to build a deeper understanding. Coherence, carefully connecting the learning progressions within and across grade levels so students can build new understandings on foundations from the previous year. The third shift is fluency, structuring class time and or homework time for students to practice those core functions such as single-digit multiplication so that they are more able to manipulate more complex concepts later on. Deep understanding and applications, students being able to explain their thinking and apply concepts to real-world problem-solving situations. Dual intensity, having a balance of conceptual understanding, procedural skill and fluency, and application of skills in problem-solving situations.
So along with these 6 shifts, the PA Core is also designed looking at mathematical practices. These mathematical practices are 8 statements which get to the core of instruction, but also get to the core of student learning. These are the things that when we start making connections K through 12 across the curriculum, these are the skills that we want students to be able to develop. And as we take a look at how these practices play out kindergarten through 12th grade, definitely we look at depth of knowledge and application so that in our, not only in our instruction, in our questioning, in our assessments, we expect deeper levels of complexity for our students as they go through and understand these practices and they cover them more deeply. This is more about the how you're teaching, not necessarily the what we're teaching. And when we think about how these practices actually play out in the students' logical mathematical lives, as they become more comfortable with these practices, as we're more transparent about these practices being the major connections in the curriculum, then the students will be able to, to access more complex math at each stage that they enter into our curriculum.
There have been a number of content shifts at each of the grade levels, K to 5, some of which are listed on the slide. A big shift across grades 3 to 5 is solving multi-step problems, which you will see later on in the presentation. Our elementary math curriculum over the past few years has been aligned to address those shifts.
At the middle school level, when we start considering these shifts, we have 2 things that we have to consider. One is that the PSSAs, as we are taking them, are occurring in the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. But at the same time, our students are entering an algebra course in the 8th grade, and that algebra course is aligned to the Keystone standards. So when we're thinking about how the students are accessing this information throughout their middle school careers, we have to be very strategic in ensuring that we're giving them the solid foundation that they need in order to have course progress, but at the same time building a broad foundation in order to address what's in the PA Core. So when we take a look at some of these shifts, these are actually topics which would have been covered naturally within the 6-8 progression, but sometimes were shifted down a grade level. So when we take a look at in the 7th grade, for instance, the algebraic concepts, looking at graphing solution sets to solve inequalities, that's a solid algebra skill, but now this becomes a 7th grade target for us. So in recognizing how these shifts have occurred and when we're thinking about what these mean for us, that means that in the breadth of what we're covering, we have to ensure that the students are getting all the information. And when we think about the depth of coverage that we need, we also have to ensure that the students can take this information and apply it in all the situations which they're being asked. And we'll talk more about the assessments later on and how these shifts are actually going to be playing out in our assessment system.
As we make these shifts, additional elementary resources have been purchased to support the implementation of the PA Core standards, such as the Investigations Common Core Supplement, which supplements the investigations program we have been using for the past 5 years, the Common Core Standards Practice Workbook, and Dreambox Learning, which is an online adaptive program that we are using in grades K to 5. At the elementary level, we have offered PRPs and book studies on the standards, as well as the standards for mathematical practices. Resources and information have been provided to teachers on both the standards and the practices. Our building math specialists, who have attended a number of workshops on the PA Core and the practices, have provided turnaround training over the course of the year at the building level. And also the elementary to middle school articulation has been huge in helping to build that continuity K to 8.
At the secondary level, the board has just approved a new math sequence, and within that math sequence, we're also taking a look at new instructional materials that will be aligned to the PA Core. But along with that, teachers have been given resources in order to make sure that they have what they need for instruction for this current year. We're in the process of ensuring that the benchmarking that we're using and the supplemental materials that we're using in our other courses are all aligned to the PA Core. And in the CPM text that the middle school is using, that text was already aligned to the course, so there were supplements that were part of the CPM adoption that we were able to access in order to give teachers what they need for instruction for this year as we're making our transition.
Not only has the elementary math curriculum been realigned to meet the PA Core standards, our unit tests and benchmarks, as well as our daily routines questions, have been refined as well to reflect the PA Core expectations.
As I said earlier, this is our first year using benchmarking at the middle school level, and so those benchmarks, we're monitoring progress toward end-of-year goals. As we continue to use the benchmarking system, it'll help us to refine how we are using that for changing and altering instruction in order to meet students' needs. Also, one of the things that we had done several years ago, we moved away in our, we have a summer supplemental program that was called the SMART program. Previously, the SMART program was really intended to help students to access the summer math packets that were given at the high school level. But then we made a shift in order to make that SMART program an algebra preview program in order to give students an advanced well, as it says, preview of the curriculum that was coming up for the following year, so that those students who had the greatest needs would be prepared for the rigors of that course. And that was fully aligned to the PA Core expectations.
Some actions we have taken at the elementary level, we've relocated some instructional time. One is win time. This is a dedicated 30 to 45 minutes, 3 days a week, for either math or reading support or enrichment. All elementary schools are using win time. This is a flexible, fluid grouping of students based on classroom data. The other allocated time that we looked at was all schools have now allocated 30 minutes out of their literacy block just for the teaching of writing. We had a 120-minute block, but we used to say to the teachers, use the 120 minutes for literacy. Now we are very deliberate in saying 30 minutes needs to be on writing and the rest of the time on reading.
Additional actions have been taken to support our K-5 students. At the elementary level, during the school day, Additional instruction is provided to students at each building to support the daily instruction in math and in reading, as well as to fill in any gaps that may exist based on data. There is also now a wider use of guided math groups, which is in essence small, flexible math group instruction that is targeted and differentiated to meet students' needs based on data. Beyond the school day, we have our extended day kindergarten program, which is now in its second year. This is also based on data and provides additional time and support to our kindergarten students so they are successful as they move into grade 1. And these are our students who have exhibited the greatest level of need. This program is starting on March 9th and will end on June 5th this year. We also have our after-school program, which is in its third year of implementation. The after-school program and resources in reading and math have been realigned to meet the PA core standards in reading and math. There are also opportunities for students to engage in additional STEM opportunities after school. And those are, one example is the Brain STEM program, which provides time for students to engage in those STEM activities and really expand their knowledge of STEM and what's involved in STEM careers. We also have our STEM teachers who are attending the STEM certificate program through Arcadia. They are receiving a great deal of knowledge and resources, and they are bringing that right back to their classroom, implementing those lessons and sharing that information and those activities and resources with their grade level colleagues.
In the area of language arts, some things that we have been doing on the secondary level during the school day is that we are taking a very close look at the reading courses that we have always provided and making sure that they are specifically aligned to PA Core and that they are addressing the needs of the students. We always did that, but now we are looking again at the shifts and being more specific about those changes. Our reading specialist PLCs are more focused on data now than ever. They are always looking at student progress and a variety of measurements, again, to make sure that they're receiving the right reading instruction. Beyond the school day, we also have shifted our SMART program to be more aligned with the shifts and to have the students be more prepared when they do go to take that test. And to extend writing in a positive way. Again, inspired by the PA Core shifts, we started a program last year called Write In, giving students the opportunity to write a variety of modes and audiences in a very authentic way in the summer.
So here's the breaking piece where we say that we address the standards and the shifts in the standards, and then we want to discuss the actual assessment. But we wanted to have some conversation about areas of this that we support and some areas that we think we're not as strongly focused. So with looking at the PA Core and our stance with PSSA, obviously, we've always had the focus on college and career readiness, as we said, so that continues. But the intention is making sure that we cover all students and looking at all students. We see that the core standards are deeper and more complex in nature, and we support that. The integration of skills across content area is something that we support as well. And it is a system for measuring growth. So we want to use as an opportunity. Some of the areas that we do not support or we feel some frustration is the timeline from implementation. So we're giving these tasks, these charges to support students without the timeline available and lack of funding. And we saw that in several of the areas in the secondary as well. Another piece we want to look at is the approach to assessment. So although we realize and we support the types of questions, and we've shared in group how we would like to use the assessment pieces at times as a teaching tool, because there's two pieces of assessing. We assess for learning, and then we assess to see if the students understood it, and for our teaching. And so using those multi-complex questions as a teaching tool to say, here are the standards, we taught it, can we use that question to see that students learned it? We celebrate that. The challenge that we have is taking one test at one time and using that as the example of success for a student, for a school, and for a district in that one snapshot. So we celebrate the complexity of the questions and the complexity of the test, and we have multiple ways to identify success in a student, in a school, and in a district, and we want to make sure that we highlight that. And then the second piece, as we move on to the assessment and to discuss it, is really about the accountability piece. And we want to be clear that the focus on the test is different, and so we want to be cautious when comparing scores to make sure that the PSSA that we had last year and the year prior that addressed the legacy standards have a different type of question in many areas than does the new test. So we want to make sure that we don't compare old scores from a previous test to the new scores in the new PSSA. We're going to spend a few minutes now explaining some of the questions and showing you what a question was last year or in the year prior and how that question looks today.
Okay. The entire structure of PSSA for the English Language Arts has changed. In the past, our students in grades 3 through 8 each year took a reading test, and then in grades 5 and 8, they took a writing test. From now on, it's one test, it's English Language Arts each year. Therefore, students in those 3, 4, 7, 6 that had not taken writing will be taking both each year. It's a big change, and it is more time in testing.
There are two new formats for testing and the type of questions that a student will see. The first is called an evidence-based selected response question. This is a two-part question. The first part will measure comprehension and analysis. The second part is the textual evidence a reader used to support their answer. What makes this a bit tricky is there could be 1 to 3 possible answers. And all answers are plausible. So the way we used to teach kids, you could rule out 2 answers. We can't do that anymore. This is a sample of what a 5th grader may see. This was taken from a release sample. They read 2 passages about the bald eagle. And the first one is measuring their comprehension on the passage. The second part of it is they will choose 2 pieces of evidence that supports the answer they chose in the first part. So this is still multiple choice, but the second part is relevant to the first part, and they are connected.
The second new type of question is called the text-dependent analysis. This type of question counts more than any other type in the English Language Arts PSSA. With this type of question, students will read at least 1 text, possibly 2 or 3. And the answers to this text may only come from the text itself. In the past, we used to encourage students to make connections to other readings, to other people, to the world. They're not able to do that anymore. Then they have to write an essay response to this, and the essay portion actually counts, whereas in the past, when they were taking a reading open response question, the writing did not count. So they are thinking not only about the complexity of the question, about the depth of their reading, about the evidence they are finding, but also about their correctness and their organization in their answer. I'd like to show you samples. You see the 7th grade open response question from before. Forgive me, I'm going to read it to you just to explain it. After reading the passage, identify the significance of the bottled chips. Use 2 pieces of evidence to support your response. So that in that question, the student is told, okay, the bottled chips are significant. Now go in and find 2 pieces of evidence to support it. Look at the difference. The new question is, authors use figurative language in their stories. Write an essay analyzing the role that figurative language plays in revealing the significance of the bottled chips in the passage. Use evidence from the passage to support your analysis. So first and foremost, students must have an understanding not only of figurative language, but of which aspect of figurative language is being used in the passage. Next, they have to analyze that use, which is all about author's craft. They're told that the bottled chips are significant, but now they have to pick evidence not just to show that it is significant, but to analyze the significance of that. That is a huge shift. And I have to say that I do applaud this shift. This is what we want our students to do. It's just happening very suddenly. And that's why, as Jerry said, we may see a slight shift when we're looking at scores this year. Now.
So when we're thinking about our items in mathematics, previously the mathematics items would align back to a single anchor. But now with the new alignment for the PA core and the PA core assessments, you can have an item that can map to multiple anchors at a single time, or multiple indicators, or can cross anchors, so that we're looking at deeper applications. So the breadth is wider, we can look at more things within a single item. The depth is deeper, what they expect the students to be able to do with the information is a lot more complex. And so this applies to both our multiple choice items and our open response items.
This is an example of a grade 3 test item from the PSSA item sampler that crosses eligible content. This particular question assesses various skills, not only various skills, but in a problem-solving situation where they have to analyze the question, look at the information that is given, take several pieces of information, several skills to figure out an answer to, in this particular case, it was a multiple choice question. So the skills that are involved in solving this problem are interpreting line plots, measuring to 1/4 of an inch, and fractions on a number line.
When we look at the 7th grade example, this is a 2-part question. This is an open-ended, open response. And actually, I love this question if we're in a classroom setting. Don't love it as much on an assessment the students are taking by themselves in a controlled environment. So when we take a look at what's being asked here, we actually are mapping to 2 different pieces of eligible content here. We're looking at proportional relationships and equations and multi-step problems using ratios. So the first part of the problem doesn't look that complex, okay? How many hours does it take to ride her bike 40 miles? We can all do that, pretty much do it in our head. Then we get to the second part, and here's where it becomes a bit more complex for the students. So now we have to understand percentages, we have to understand rate time, interpret the graph, solve a percent problem, and then at the end, justify the response. And that justification of the response is really what becomes the big part here for the student.
Can I just say that so far none of us can answer these questions?
I wanted to reiterate one of the points. As I'm laughing and still trying to solve those equations, I'm still stuck a little in the 3rd grade one at the moment. But I wanted to reiterate one of the things that Arthur Mitchell just said. These problems, these examples we've shown in the literature, in the literacy test, are wonderful problems. They're great examples if we were working with students in a classroom setting and working through them. the hope is that we've done this, enough, and we've worked with the language for the students so they understand the word analyze and the word synthesis and all the words in those problems so that they become comfortable with it. You can all see by those examples, these are difficult, they're complex. They require vocabulary and reading and being able to solve multi-step problems. So that's always our caution. They're good problems. They're just not the type of problems that many of our students are used to seeing on a one-time assessment. And that's the thing that we keep coming back to. So as we open this presentation, and so important in all the work that we do, is our relation between anything that we do and the strategic plan. While we embrace a lot of the shifts in the core, and while we're really proud of the work that we've done in making these changes in this alignment, we feel like with everything that we do, that we exceed the work that you see here tonight. The shifts to our strategic plan and our way of thinking, yes, our students have and will continue to be college and career ready, but we like to think of everything in an innovative way. And we like to reflect that we're going beyond the implementing state requirements, that we're trying to be innovative about it, that we're trying to think differently about this. And while some of these and most of this are state directives that we're obligated to adopt, that we know as a curriculum team and we know as a district, we're doing it with the spirit that we adopt everything in Lower Merion and making it our own. So we hope that, by hearing what everyone is saying tonight and seeing those examples up there, that we've taken this work seriously. We're working with our students day in and day out to adopt this language, to think about these shifts in a way that makes sense to a third grader, a seventh grader, an 11th grader, and we're cognizant of that with all of our work. So we bring this with the spirit that kind of we bring everything in Lower Merion, that we're making it our own, and that we're working a K through 12 team to do that. So we thank you, and we're open for questions.
Thank you for such a comprehensive presentation. I'll open it up to board questions at this time. Please, Melissa.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It's very helpful, and it's really also helpful to get a sense of, what it is that you see as positive and what you see as challenging, and how we adopt it in a way that reflects our values. Appreciate that. So the questions, and these are the second time some of us are seeing these questions, and I've heard from a number of educators that concerns whether some of these expectations are even developmentally appropriate, particularly at the elementary age, although I just haven't spoken to people at secondary, so I don't know what you think about that. So I'd be interested to hear what your opinions are in terms of are these developmentally appropriate for most kids, or are there concerns that you have about this issue?
So from the work that I've done and the reading that I've done, and looking deeply at the questions, the answer is a yes and a no. So, as we've said, yes, as a teacher, if I'm using that as my assessment for a lesson, and that I can go through and identify that one place where the child made the mistake, and so that I can use that as a teaching tool, absolutely appropriate. And I love the questions. The concern is, as we've said all along, is that if it's on that Thursday when Jerry, the third grader, takes the test and I make a mistake, you don't know where my mistake happened, and you assume that I got the whole question wrong. So, that's the concern. So I think the yes and the no, if that's okay to have an answer, but I'm not sure if we have specifics with math and literacy.
Thank you.
I completely agree with the yes and the no, and I just wanted to mention that with the core shift, we saw something called staircase of complexity. And essentially, the rigor of reading has increased. We look at reading by the lexile level, which is a measurement that looks at syllables and words and sentences, and that has increased for all students. Where we would expect students to be, let's say in the past in 12th grade, we expect to see that now in 10th. So there is a shift. Do I think that is appropriate? I think it's wonderful for most students, not for all students. And it's imperative that we provide the supports for those students who are not on that level.
Thank you. Diane?
Yeah, I echo Melissa's comments. Thank you very much for this. I have a bunch of small questions which I won't even touch, but kind of on the bigger scale. I feel like this has become a focus on this test, and it's such a gotcha for these kids, and I don't feel like we're getting really any value out of it. And so I have a comment and a question, and my comment is, I really think we should make the state legislators take these tests. I'm happy to give them the 6th grade test. They don't have to take the 11th grade test. I'd love to see, honestly, just, I mean, how many even sit through the whole thing? They'd get up and walk out. It's just absurd. And then the next comment I have, which is a little tough, is what happens if we refuse the testing? We just, as a district, refuse the testing. I mean, we have proven time and time again that we send our kids off. Now, and obviously there's kids who fall through the cracks and kids who are not achieving, and we strive to reach those students as well. But this test is not going to help us with those students. You know, we have a pretty good success rate of getting our kids college and career ready, as you know, Ms. Hockfield mentioned. So what are the ramifications? Any idea?
I'll try to address that, and as seriously as I can. The reality is that, and we all know this, that PDE has legislative guidelines that governs public institutions. There's dollars and funding attached to those requirements, both federal and at the state level. So, for example, with any legislation or any mandate, you decide that in an act of civil disobedience, you're not going to move forward with that. I don't know when the state will decide to come in and begin auditing a district and then putting in whatever sanctions they feel is appropriate for that. I don't know when they will decide funding then becomes an issue where if you're not in compliance with these particular Chapter 4 regulations or any other regulations, then these are the sanctions that we're going to put place, and from that on you no longer become a public school system and you move into another direction. But I think that, you know, in terms of that question, there are a lot of districts who are just really fed up to the point where they don't know what else to do except for to say, there's no way that we can implement this level of instruction, this level of testing, based on the resources that we have. And I think that this trying to be optimistic and remember our new governor's platform and try to think about our new Secretary of Education and his platform. I think there is a larger ear at the state level in terms of reducing and eliminating the impact of testing in the state of Pennsylvania, and I think they're looking to, there's been recent conversation about the keystones and whether or not that needs to be removed, and there are people who are taking advantage of this new Secretary of Education who has stated several times during his previous administration as a superintendent that the testing is unfair. It hurts students, especially those who are in underserved districts. We can't comply with the mandate. There's no funding for it. And I'm hoping that that is echoed in his time or tenure in his new position.
Very quickly, two points. One, based on what Mr. Orlando gave us in terms of the preliminary budget, we get $705,600 from the federal government. If we lose our federal funding, I think we can find it. The second thing is, you know, we have a legislative committee meeting coming up. Perhaps we have 3 math questions and 3 literacy questions from 3rd grade, 7th grade, and 11th grade, and just offer them to our legislators and see what they think.
I do agree. I mean, we talked about bringing, I mean, the legislators, Dr. O'Leary has organized the legislators to come in part because I think we want to raise these issues with them and let them know. And I think that, you know, we have taken a much sort of stronger positions in the last couple of years on a number of these issues, which we really don't have the decision-making power, including for, you know, pre-K funding and these kinds of things. And I do, you know, think it's a good opportunity. You know, I don't know about giving them the test, although that could be interesting.
You don't have to make them. You don't have to tell. You don't have to mark them.
So, in fact, if they hear this, they may not come anymore. But they're probably not watching. But yeah, I mean, I think these are the kinds of things we should raise absolutely at the meeting.
I bet you they've never seen the questions.
No, they probably haven't.
Lori?
I wanted to get a sense of how much extra time, and this is amazingly strategic and well thought out, and I appreciated actually some of the positive reflections on how this could be good for the students, because when you hear any increase in testing, it's easy to think how awful it all is. But just in terms of time for administrators and teachers, is this going to be kind of like a hard ramp up and then it'll become much more operationalized into, you know, as we move forward? Or how is this impacting what's going on in the schools, I guess, is what I'm trying to get a sense of.
Sure. Let me try to answer that in a couple ways. First, our curriculum is embedded with all the materials and the information the student, you know, will need to know. That's hopefully you saw that throughout the whole presentation this evening. So it's not an increase of instructional time as much as it's a change it's a change in curriculum, the way it's taught and the way questions are posed. So this year particularly, working with the students to understand the vocabulary and the change in questioning is hallmark. From the time a student starts 3rd grade on, they will get it more and more each year. So it, you know, really is beginning in kindergarten, 1st grade, and 2nd grade when we talk about vocabulary and language. We're not waiting the 3rd year to start, the 3rd grade to start. We're starting all the way K to 12. As far as the instructional time has shifted very slightly, as you saw, Dr. DeRosa mentioned that writing has the designated 30 minutes that every teacher's to be doing now. That was at their choice before. The second thing is the implementation of WIN, what I need to know. The WIN time came out of a long year of study about what we're doing with time on the curriculum level, on the elementary level for curriculum. We are the people that started that conversation. We knew there's not enough time to do all the things we needed to do. This didn't come from the public. It came from us saying we have to look at our schedules because there's so much coming at us. We have to redo things. It was the public that said, oh, we wanted so many more different, you know, we still want to keep everything we have and yet excel the way we're supposed to excel. And we knew 3 years ago that time was of the essence and time was at, you know, a precious commodity. So as far as the instruction of the test, the testing has increased by a little bit. not by much. What has changed a lot, I think, is maybe the way we're testing, and let me explain very quickly. The previous test had 6 exams in the reading and math test. Started with math and went reading, and it alternated every day for 6 days, regardless of how a school broke it up or how how they scheduled it. So what they've done now is they separated out 100%. The English Language Arts is a test in its own self, by itself for 1 week, and math is now tested by itself in another week. Past tests, 2 grades were tested in writing. Grades 5th and 8th, we took the writing test, which was 2 or 3 days, depending on how a school scheduled it. There was a multiple choice section in the beginning about usage, and then there were often 2 prompts that a student had to respond to. So those writing prompts are now incorporated into English Language Arts. So 5th and 8th do not have a standalone writing test, but yet now everybody has a writing component in the English Language Arts test. So for grades 3, 4, 6, and 7, they have an extra section of writing that they never had before, but yet 5th and 8th are now released of roughly 2 writing tests because there were 3 components. Now they're only doing 1 component. So very quickly, it's an adjustment of time, not much more of a growth in time. The standalone, for be what it is to be fair, in grades 4 and 8 we also test science, and science is 3 tests also, and that's done the last week of the month.
Okay.
Is that helpful?
Yeah, and just, I assume the time it's taken teachers to also transition to incorporating these things in the classroom is probably significant. So can you just
Sure.
comment on how that's going?
Well, I'm going to let my curriculum colleagues touch base a little bit more of that.
So as part of the professional learning that we're doing with teachers in making this shift to the core with our curriculum, this is part of the work that we're doing. I wouldn't say it's additional in that it's different. We're doing different work in our professional learning in order for teachers to be able to incorporate this in their classrooms. I think the other really key point I was thinking during all of this is, in part of that work that we're doing with teachers is the shift in thinking. It's very important that teachers understand and be able to work with students so that students are not hyped up about these tests. It's a test, it's 1 day, it may be 2 days, it may be 3 days in the case of where we're adding a science in 4th and 8th grade. But it's really important, and we're working hard with teachers and so that they can work hard with their students to understand what it is. It's a test. It's 1 day. There aren't huge decisions being made as a result of it. Unfortunately, at the high school level, where it became a graduation requirement, as we talked to you about at the last CCOB meeting, we're trying as a district to think of ways so that that won't be onerous for students, alternatives to getting through that requirement. So yes, it's a shift in some of the professional learning that we're doing, but it's also a shift in how we talk about tests and how we prepare students for tests.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Respond to that? Can I say
please.
something? Sorry. Ms. Eichmann, I think thank you, Ms. Hockfield, if we were to ask an educator, would they have rather spent their time focusing on another type of instructional practice, 100% of them would say absolutely, right? So as much as we've tried to help navigate and find seamless transition between these standards, I think that it has taken hours and hours of professional learning experiences that comes at an opportunity cost. So I think that if you, again, were ask our teachers in the last 2-3 years, as the state was beginning to literally roll this out and say, here you go, figure it out, our teachers would probably tell you that there are a myriad of instructional practices, things that we value as a district, things that we would rather focus on without those top-down mandates. We've tried better than other districts because we're positioned differently to lessen that that load which in my conversations with superintendents in Montgomery area and around the Commonwealth, I have a deep sense of sympathy and empathy for those districts who just can't carry that load, not sure how they manage. But it's taken a toll on our district, but we've positioned ourselves in a way that doesn't look the same as others. For districts who have a 50, 60% below basic rate, and who, when we talk about equitable funding, is another conversation maybe that our legislators would talk about. They're in the hole, and they're in the hole big time. And I think this is the conversation around where does Lower Merion School District stand in helping to be a voice when we're fortunate enough to have the opportunities not to get hit as hard, but we're getting hit. And eventually, we've cushioned ourselves, but unfortunately not forever. And we're going to start seeing the impact of these mandates in a way that other districts are seeing them. So that is concerning for us to, though we've been acting, aggressively act now, because it will change the way in which we do things, and it will change the way in which we fund programs if the state continues to move in that direction.
Any questions to my right? Marie?
I have a couple questions. The new PSSA questions, how will they be phased in? Is it a couple each year, or is it a massive shift? The other part of that is who's going to grade these new questions now that there's a lot of writing components? And then the third question I have is, are we talking to the teams formed around IEPs and 504s about accommodations that they may not have wanted on the old PSSAs but would want on the new PSSAs?
You also answer all three of our questions in the way. People who are watching this later can't see, won't hear what the answers are. Restate the questions, what you say? The answers. You gave the answers out there. If there's enough microphone, people watching later won't hear the answers. Gotcha. Sorry.
So you remember the first question?
I don't remember the first one. I remember 2 and 3.
I believe maybe you should repeat. I'm sorry.
Questions be phased in, and how will they manage to grade all of the new writing questions?
The phasing in has already happened. For the past year, they had test questions on the prior exam, and that's when our teachers and our students really saw the difference for the first time. So if you heard a story where a student was stuck or was upset because they didn't understand why there were 2 parts to a question and multiple answers to a question, which is what we heard here administratively, they started last year. The full new test is coming this April, so it's here. Who corrects them? The state has a vendor, DRC, Data Recognition Corporation, is out of Minnesota. Everything is sent back to them. They scan them, and they have readers all across the country. They train the readers. I believe any reading section is read twice by 2 different people. They come up with the same, is this correct? They come up with the same score, it moves on. If they have a different score, they have a 3rd reader come in and break the tie. And that's all done in a fairly timely fashion for everybody across the Commonwealth. We do get our first set of raw scores around the 4th of July. The hard copy reports aren't generated until the end of August, beginning of September. The third question, talking about or 504 and IEP accommodations, absolutely, positively, always. It's not an option, particularly when it comes to state mandated tests. We break down every possible accommodation we can for a student. Let me give you a quick example. If a student goes to a special education teacher for language arts instruction, they very well will go to the language arts teacher for this test. If they stay in the classroom, but they're still a special ed student, that's noted, and they're watched a little bit extra than maybe some other students. So we break out ELL students together. We break out special ed students who should be broken out. Even kids in the regular ed who are regular ed, if they're too fidgety or if they're too moving around, we move them into a smaller group. The state does not mandate how large or small a group is. We have that control. And we do a really, really good job about breaking down and knowing our kids and giving the best possible test environment as we can.
Additional questions?
And Ms. Frazier wants to add to that.
Please.
No, and just in addition to the question about the accommodations, the state comes out every year with an allowable accommodation guideline, and we make sure that all of our counselors, all of our teachers, all of our LEAs have the most updated copy of that when it comes out, because the state's really clear on what we're allowed to use as an accommodation, and so the teams use that as a guideline too.
Ben, please.
Thank you for the presentation. I have two questions, but my first one is, I think you mentioned a private company in Minnesota grades it. Is it
private? It's the vendor that. You're making me do this.
Sorry.
The state contracts with the vendor. The vendor is out of Minnesota. The vendor is Data Recognition Corporation. They also create the test for Pennsylvania.
So the vendor, I assume, is, we can presume, potentially making a profit off of all of this.
Oh, absolutely.
All right. My second question is more on the writing side of all of this. I think there's the persuasive writing, I guess, where the concept is to get you to believe my opinion on X and Y. But I've also found that persuasive writing is, are you writing interesting enough that I want to read the next page? And I find that to be more of a creative thing. I don't know what we can do, but is there some measure of making our writers just better writers, not necessarily writers that fit a standardized test? An interesting writer to be read.
You're absolutely right about all that. And with the shift in PA core, it's moved from persuasive writing to argumentative writing, which is very precise, and it takes out some of the style that goes with persuasive writing. So what we are doing is helping our students understand that there's assessment writing, and that for tests like PSSA, there's a certain kind of writing they need to do. But there's a whole world of writing that is not tested on PSSA, and something like persuasive style and rhetoric. We teach that, the students write it, but when they sit down and take the PSSA, they know exactly how to go into argumentative mode. Is that true? Okay.
Please.
You mentioned that the PSSA scores might drop a little as a result of these new questions. How does that align with PVAS and the growth profiles of each student? And have we figured out what we're equating as success?
Send this guy up for that question. Short straw. Well, I mean, equating is done every year. So the state, as we go from test format to test format, they come up with an equating formula. They do send a technical paper out, a white paper around what that equating formula looks like. We give it to our top people to say, does this make sense? Sure it does, because their statisticians say that it does make sense. So even though the state has said you really can't compare one PSSA to the other, we have to have a continuum. So there will be an equating that takes place because we have to have a continuum of scores for accountability profiles. So how will that actually play out? Well, when we actually take a look at the reporting categories and things, because we know the reporting categories have changed, we'll have to take a look at those very differently than the previous reporting categories. So it really becomes our own analysis year by year, once the shift has taken place in order to, we really are, we're hitting the reset button this year and saying that now we have different reporting categories. This aligns differently, this aligns to a new curriculum differently. So this year's assessment will almost be a ground zero for us, but for the state purposes, there will be a continuum within how the state looks at this.
And Ms. Robbins, I think what I want to add to the fact that there is a groundswell of concern with educators around the validity and reliability of the PVOS process and what that means to my overall rating. So I think you're going to see a lot more battles between educators and this new PVOS and the new testing, and whether or not that is a correlation or connection to my overall performance. So good question, and we're going to see a lot more educators, unfortunately, filing claims against state institutions, PDE or any other around their evaluation process and the merits of PVOS and growth.
I have one question. Oh, you do? No, you get to go.
Well, it's not really a question, but a statement, and I just wanted to thank you all. But when I was listening to this, and this dates me a little bit, when I grew up, there is something called American Bandstand, and
Never heard of it.
but what would happen if you can remember is they would have a board, and they would play a song, and they would have all the letters in different places all over the board, and they had a team, and it could be a girl, boy, girl, but while they were playing, the team worked together to move all the letters till it actually made the topic or the title of the song, and they worked together. And in the beginning, when I was watching it, it seemed like it took them a long time to be able to figure out what to do, but as they began to do that, it got quicker and quicker, so sometimes by the time you actually looked, they were already finished doing the word. And I commend this team for having all the pieces in place so that every time the rules change, you're working on getting with the team, you're working on taking all of those pieces and being able to put them together to get the theme. And that's what I see every time we turn around from state or something, there's always a different mandate. But this team is so good, and you have your act together so well that it's taking you, you're anticipating what that next move is going to be, even though you're really not sure, so that together, you're coming together and you're putting it all together, so it makes a clearer theme for those students, parents, and other people that have to work with this piece, so that you can, just get it together. So I just really thank you for doing that for us.
I didn't know where you were going with that, but that was really good. But now I love it. Thank you.
So I have a question about assessment. So you're a tough act to follow, Mrs. Pollard. But so now we're required to have 8 additional hours of testing over and above what we had prior to. Are we looking at the ways in which we're going to streamline or start to compact some of the district-based assessments that we already have in place? What are we talking about in that regard so that our students aren't sitting so long for various tests? And what are those conversations right now with the team?
I'm not positive that it is actually 8 hours, to be honest with you. As I tried to describe, it's an increase for grades 3, 4, 6, and 7 for roughly 1 hour each. Okay? And then it's a reduction in grades 5 and 8 by at least 2 hours of testing. So what it is, actually, you now have not that this is necessarily a positive thing, but there's a more standardized block of time across all grades at the same time than in the past. So the 5th grade might still be testing, but the 4th grade might have been done, and they had to be quiet in the halls and things like that. So it's now more consistent across all grade levels, 3 through 8, in the timing of it. I'm just going to make a quick comment about the second part of that question about what are we doing inside the district. We have a district assessment team, and we meet several times a year. We look at what we offer, the need, the reason that we're offering, the need to do that, and we're continually to do that. Now, I'm going to invite anybody else who wants to come up. So currently, with this theme of over-testing or the purposefulness of testing, we have, in my tenure here, 4 years, we've already eliminated 1 test on the elementary level. And we are always looking at, again, how purposeful our need is to test and what we're doing. I will tell you that teachers who use data a lot like more points of data, and that might be a test. People who don't use data so often don't see the purpose of testing. But so far, all that we have are either benchmarks, which are the old teacher made-up tests. Instead of a teacher creating a test, it's now given to them out of the product of the curriculum that we purchase, and it's across the same grade given at the same time to measure the whole grade's learning in progress. So benchmarks is just a fancy name now for a classroom test, unit test. The only other things that we do, I think, on the elementary level are things about reading to check for fluency, and we use, the DRP and things just to keep in check and make sure that our points are a growth point and not anybody's being stagnant or losing growth. Does anybody else want to?
Actually, before you go up, go ahead, Dr. Doria, but I have to say that the curriculum team has been tasked, and very specifically, with the notion that we understand that there are assessments that PDE has put upon us that we can't change in a short period of time. Legislatively, we'll talk about that. But at the end of the day, we've been tasked to think differently about the number of assessments we give at the elementary, secondary, and high school level. If you look at the total number of assessments a fourth grader sits for, there's no argument that that's too much. The question is, how much data points do you need to get a sense of what student needs are? And we've been trying to find a system K through 12 that allow us to get to what are the needs of that student without putting in place 24 different assessments in the fourth grade. That includes our own unfortunate device, which obviously we want to know about students, but in addition to that, the number that PDE requires. So if we can't change PDE's state-mandated requirements, what we can change is ask ourselves, do we need these 11 assessments? Do we need these 6 benchmarks that are throughout September, October, November, December, however that works? So part of the strategic plan spoke loud and clear that we were going to significantly reduce what we could as a district without getting away from obviously data-driven decision. But there comes a point, how much data point do you need to get a good pulse of where students are at? And we have to make some very tough decisions with assessments that we like and realize that some of them have to go.
So I was just going to say that Dr. Marseille had given us the charge, and there's the answer. And the second piece is really having us work with teachers to see how they're using the data that we currently have. And then we can kind of identify what overlaps, so that do we really need to give this and this to get that particular answer. And then the second piece is looking at formative assessments and really looking at, if we're teaching a particular skill or competency, what small measure of assessment can we give in the classroom to identify that that particular child did or didn't get that lesson that we taught, and then how do we use that to move forward. So those two pieces, but thank you.
Thank you. Diane, you still have a question?
Yeah. I just have 2 questions about Common Core as opposed to the testing, and one's sort of language arts and one's math. And the language arts one has to do with closely reading text, and you kept emphasizing closely reading text and everything. And in my experience, that totally destroys literature. If you rip a piece of literature apart and look at every little device and every little phrase and every little approach, it just totally destroys the literature that you're reading. And so my question is, whether Common Core requires it or not, are we still allowing our kids to read literature, asking our kids to read literature for the enjoyment of the literature? Absolutely. Yeah, sorry. She said absolutely. Yeah, I just think it's so important.
Absolutely, we are. These are wonderful skills for students to have, but this is not what we're doing all the time.
Okay.
And across curricular areas, we're having students read for the enjoyment of reading.
Okay. And then a math question. But but it has a little bit of language to it. So there's this big emphasis on language and math and language and math. And I'm getting reports of first and second graders having to do word problems, and they can't read yet. And yet they're having to do math that requires them to respond to a problem that's written in words instead of numbers. And I'm curious and I'm concerned about some kids just love math. They love numbers. They love the whole concept of numbers, and they can take it and run with it. And so long as they never have to read a word, and they can just mess with the numbers. And I'm afraid of this language focus in math, especially at the elementary level, that we're gonna lose math students because of the burden of the language. And I'm just wondering if someone wants to speak to that.
Definitely, there is more of a focus of word problems at the elementary level, starting early on, starting in first grade. And the teachers, when working with students, of course, the primary focus is developing computational fluency and number sense. That's first and foremost very early on in K and 1. As they go through the latter part of first grade, they get more into those problem-solving situations where students now need to see an application of mathematics and problem-solving, and the essence of what we use math for in real life. With that being said, other scaffolds are put into place as we help students to become problem solvers. We teach them the problem-solving process, the steps to solving problems and what that looks like. And teachers are modeling how to break apart a problem, specific information, how to use models to solve problems, how to look at the components of a problem and pick out that important information. So that's modeled constantly at the elementary level. And, as students move through third, fourth, fifth grade, the problems get more complex, of course. But early on, we focus on, and we continue to focus on that problem-solving approach. We continue to provide opportunities for students to understand the vocabulary that they're seeing, that it's a different language, and providing opportunities for them to engage in that language, to see the language, to hear it, to, for teachers to model it. So there's a lot of early scaffolds that are put into place to help students not only, deal with computation, but also the complexity of reading a word problem.
Right, but you have, I joke, this is a huge problem because we were just joking, we were talking about the budget, and I said I spent all day yesterday crunching numbers. I didn't read a single word problem. I was figuring out lots of different things and trying to work out what this meant and what that meant, but I didn't read a single problem that said Johnny ran and got 5 apples. So, I think we have to be, I just hope that in our instruction.
There is a balance.
I'm going to say not even a balance. I think we should be stronger on the side of numeracy and number skills and much, much lighter, especially in the lower grades, on the reliance on word problems.
Yeah, and we definitely are. Early on, K and 1, we are really focusing on that numeracy and that computational fluency piece. That's a huge focus early on.
Because, and this is totally anecdotal, but I'm hearing from people that say they have kids who love math, and now can't stand it because of the reading piece.
But be assured, early on, that is our focus, to develop computational fluency and number sense in our students.
Thank you. So with these shifts with the PA Common Core, what conversations are we having with parents and guardians in terms of the kinds of support they can provide at home for their students?
That's a really timely question because Dr. Dory and I just arranged with several of the curriculum team members to present at the ISC on March 10th. We also just arranged at the secondary level the following week to present to both the HSAs at Welsh Valley and Ballackinwood. We know that this is a learning curve for parents, and in part of our communication plans, this is what we've been deciding, who do we need to communicate this to? What's the best way to do it? We've tried this in the past, last year, several times. We didn't get great turnouts for those meetings, so we've put lots of information on the website and things like that so the parents can have it and send things home from the schools in our Thursday folders, in our newsletters. One thing we're going to try at the secondary level, and we think we may get some turnout, is we're going to combine our math sequence changes night with the shifts in the core. It sounded like a hook, so we think we may get a little more of a turnout for that. But we're increasing our efforts to communicate this with parents, whether it's through writing or whether it's at meetings. And we'll be at the ISE, as I said, on March 10th, having this conversation.
Thank you. Please.
So one of the reasons the presentation was broken up the way that it was is when we hear about the core, people are usually talking about the PARCC and Smarter Balance assessments. And so the core are the standards. It's what we teach, it's how we teach. As we said, if we had those assessments and we're just using the classroom level, those are great teaching tools. Divorcing that from the assessment practices, the PSSA, and how we're measuring and how what's going to happen on those, as we described, those episodic one-day assessments, is very different. So as the teaching is shifting, we're always growing in our practice. If this helps us to grow in our practice, helps our students to be better problem solvers, better communicators across the curriculum, this is good stuff. When we take a look at how we're addressing the assessments, that's a whole nother issue. And you're right, that is a much steeper hill to climb, because that is we haven't taught to a test. We haven't said to our kids and to our teachers, here are a bunch of test-taking skills. We have to invest in some time in those things now, because the shifts in the assessment are forcing us into teaching some test-taking skills which we haven't done previously. The first time our kids were getting test-taking skills were when all the students were taking SAT and ACT practice tests and going to those types of tutors in order to be successful on those real, difficult and high-stakes tests for them. Now this is the first, these are high stakes. SAT, those are high stakes before. Now this is high stakes for us because, of course, this is a graduation requirement. And so everything leading up to our students taking the Keystone have to be built in a systematic way in order for us to ensure that those students are going to have success, because that's a graduation requirement now. But as I said, the core itself, those are just teaching tools. Those are ways of organizing and thinking. Thinking about the assessments, that's a whole nother layer that we have to continue to prepare for.
Thank you. We will now have audience recognition on both agenda and non-agenda items. If there is anyone interested in making public comment, please come and sign up with Mr. Orlando and let us know general vicinity of where you live in the district. Seeing none, the meeting is adjourned. Oh,
Can we just remind everybody that
okay, announcement, please.
A week from Thursday, 7:30, our local legislators or their representatives will be here, all the way up to the federal level. We have U.S. representatives coming also.
And thank you to Dr. O'Leary for organizing the forum. And now we're adjourned.